Thank you, Thomas. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to B-Sides. Welcome to this panel on women in cybersecurity. Like Thomas said, I'm really excited to be up here and to be facilitating this discussion. So this morning, you'll notice that I have three ladies with me, and I'll just go ahead and introduce them. Right here on my right, my direct right, is Harpreet Kohli. She is a cybersecurity leader and member of ISO IEC Standards Council of Canada. She has 15 years of experience in leading and developing cybersecurity programs for academic, utility, and banking industries. She has helped organizations realize their business goals while effectively managing cybersecurity risks and compliance requirements. She is currently a manager at ATCO Group, and Harpreet is leading development and sustainment of the cybersecurity program there, which includes risk management, governance, cybersecurity incident response, and security awareness. Ladies and gentlemen, Harpreet Kohli. Next to Harpreet is Lauren Troppmann. Lauren has been involved in IT for over 20 years with a strong background in business management. She is a successful leader of initiatives that define and deliver quality solutions, effectively supporting business strategies through organizational change and technology. Over the last few years, she has taken on the challenge of developing effective governance of IT risk and security and implementing those practices and processes at the Alberta Motor Association. And to the very far right is Raychael Hayward. She is the Director of Compliance and Special Investigations with the Alberta Information and Privacy Commissioner's Office. She has over 15 years' experience working in the privacy field. Raychael leads high-profile and offense investigations, including the largest offense investigation in the history of the office, which resulted in 38 charges under the Health Information Act and additional criminal charges. And so that rounds out our panel this morning. So what are we here to talk about? I named this session Women in Cybersecurity, Brute Forcing the Glass Ceiling. And we've had a lot of research recently, a lot of pieces being written about the gap of talent in cybersecurity. And in addition to that gap, we've seen stats. There's a particular study that was done by Frost and Sullivan a few years ago that highlighted in about 2020, we'll need almost 2 million cybersecurity professionals, and we just don't have the numbers to fill that need. Additionally, that study points out that currently, women in cybersecurity only represent about 10% of the industry. 11%, but yeah, 10%. Right, so we have this gap, and currently, women are just underrepresented in the industry. So today, we wanted to talk about is this really an issue? Are we really underrepresented? And I think we'll find that it is. Then what do we do, right? So 2020 is just around the corner. How do we address this issue in cybersecurity? And so I'm gonna go right into questions, ladies. I thought we could get started with your story, each of your stories. So essentially, how did you get your start in the industry? Was it kind of something that you fell into, or was it something that you always knew you'd do? Harpreet?
Okay. Thank you, Nickkisha. So many years ago, while I was working in India, as part of the professional development program, I got an opportunity to undergo an extensive 1-month training offered by Cisco. It was a network security. So Cisco was brought into our organization to train a group of us, and then the expectation was that we will train others in our environment. And that training was followed up by some sessions where we could develop ourselves further if we want to. As part of the training, I got to configure routers, I got to program firewalls, and I learned quite a lot about network security. And the knowledge I acquired at that time, I realized how critical security is for any system design, development, and configuration, and how significant impact it can have on organizations if not done right. And since then, cybersecurity has been my passion. I have worked hard to develop myself in this field. When I came to Canada 10 years ago, I did my master's in information system security management. And that program really enhanced my knowledge and exposure about the technical aspect, the governance aspect, and the audit aspect of cybersecurity. And yeah, so this has been my passion so far.
So my background is not so much in technology, although I always followed technology and picked up classes in computer science, but my background is truly business. But through the course of my career, I've always been involved in managing technology or governance of technology, and so have developed a real facility for talking to business about technology challenges in a way that the business understands what the risk is to them and what the potential benefit is to them, and through that became very good at organizational change. So my organization invited me to take on the challenge of taking on enterprise risk management with a focus on IT. And you can't talk about risk management in IT without talking about security. So about a year ago, they just threw up their hands and said, well, that's it. Now you're responsible for the governance of IT security as well as IT risk management. And although I fell into it, I'm fascinated by it and love a learning challenge, and this certainly has been a learning challenge, but I still get to do those things that I'm good at, is talk to the business about how IT security represents a risk to them and put it in terms that's meaningful to them so that IT can move forward doing the right things.
Yeah. Raychael?
So I fell into it. When I was in university, I was going to change the world, right? I was going to be part of the United Nations. I was going to do all this great work, and I have an undergrad degree in political science. And when I graduated with that degree, I couldn't get a job. I only speak English, and I'm not fluent in any other languages. And I quickly learned that if I wanted to work in those areas, I needed to develop some other skills. So I took a real practical approach after 6 months or so of realizing that I wasn't going to get to where I wanted to be with an undergrad in political science. So I got a master's degree in public administration. And as part of that, I had a practicum where I worked for the government of Manitoba in a small little office called the Office of Information Technology. That was what it was called. And during that time, and this may date me, we were actually developing the security policy for the government of Manitoba because there was no unified security policy for the government of Manitoba back then. And back then, I was the only woman in that office. Everybody else, we had deputy ministers and so on. Everybody else in the office was male. And then from that position, I sort of fell into privacy. And I think I offer a little bit of a unique perspective here because privacy is, at least in Alberta, it is definitely female-dominated as opposed to male-dominated. But I've worked in those fields prior to working at the Commissioner's office where I was either the only woman in the office or one of a clear minority in there. But I fell into it after I'd worked for the government of Manitoba. I ended up working for Alberta Health and sort of fell into working with the Health Information Act and health privacy from there. And then I really, really loved it. I really love what I do. I love the opportunity to protect rights. And that kind of goes back to what my undergrad degree was really about anyway. I wanted to change the world. And I'm not really changing the world necessarily, but I do think that I'm working to protect the rights of Albertans. So it wasn't exactly what I'd planned on doing, but through weaving through a couple of different areas, I fell into it, and I really love what I do today.
All right. I think probably what I take away from that is, getting into the industry can look a lot of different ways. A lot of times we think it's something that's linear, You have to that's been your dream for like 20 years and you've worked on that all your life. But a lot of times it doesn't have to look like that. And so that doesn't have to be a barrier to entry. What about challenges? Like, what kind of challenges have you faced, in your career thus far?
Yeah, okay. So I would say coming to Canada with a limited knowledge of Canadian culture, Canadian work culture, was a challenge. Raising my young child with doing my master's and searching for job was a challenge. But I successfully rose up to every challenge and embedded myself successfully. And I think that's the best way to educate yourself and embed yourself. So especially because I was an immigrant woman, there was some different challenges which might not be there for women who are already born and raised here. And then the biggest challenge was balancing family commitment with work. Because I come from India, and in Indian culture there are more expectations from women and family. It's not that my husband doesn't support me, but it's just something in our culture that there are more expectations on the family. So I think that was a challenge. Just as a woman, I had to work extra hard, stretch myself to really balance both out.
Great. We'll dig a little bit deeper into that in just a minute.
Sure.
Lauren?
So I'm going to talk about two things. One is, and this will date me far worse than anything that Raychael said. I entered the workforce at a time before the Human Rights Charter. So there's some extraordinary stories that go back there, but one in particular, and I'll talk about my reaction to it, and I think it's still the appropriate reaction today, is that when I was in a position where I was training management trainees, and I went to the senior HR resource person in this institution, who happened to be a woman, and said, I want to become a management trainee. I want to get into that program. And she looked at me dead in the eye and said, no, we would not put you in because you're most likely to get married and have children. And at that point, it struck me as extraordinary, but it wasn't that unusual at that time. It was unusual to have it put that point blank to you, but it wasn't that unusual as an attitude. And my choice at that point was to quit training the management trainees and go find myself a position in an organization that was far more supportive. I still think that's the right thing, is that you need to choose your battles. And if you end up in a situation with an employer who is not supportive, and that doesn't matter if it's gender, or if it's race, or if it's whatever your situation is that you don't burn your bridges, but there are lots of good employers. Go find a good employer and develop your potential in a place that's going to allow you to develop your potential and develop the potential of people around you.
Yeah. Raychael?
So I knew that we were going to be asked this question ahead of time, and I thought about it a lot, and I went various different ways in my head about how I was actually going to answer this. Yeah. I decided that I'd share something quite honest with you, and then kind of go in a different direction. So the first thing is when I first got out in the workforce, in my first real job, I was, like I said, the only woman in the room, and literally the only woman who was involved in writing a security policy. And for those of you who haven't been in government, implementing change in government, especially when it's across government, is challenging, probably like most organizations, I would guess. But and you were challenged a lot in those positions, and when you're trying to implement change. And it was intimidating a lot when you're in a room surrounded by, when you're the only woman. Sometimes you can feel that, like you sense that you might not have the same level of credibility. And being young as well, I just finished my master's degree. So that was challenging early on. Lately, I would steer this in a slightly different direction and say that my biggest challenge today is which is why I'm so pleased that I have the opportunity to be here today, is to try and unite the security world and the privacy world a little bit better. Sometimes we're your best friend in organizations, and other times we seem to be IT's worst enemy. And I find that a constant challenge outside of my office when we're working with organizations, large, medium, and small. It seems like sometimes we're still on very different levels, and it's a challenge that I've faced from those early days up until now. It's something that I really want to work to change going forward.
Right. So my next question was really going to be, do you think that women face different challenges than men do in the industry? But I think that you've already kind of alluded to the fact that maybe we do. So I'll just ask something that kind of has been on my mind for some time. We've seen a lot of reports that there is gender inequality in a wide variety of industries, not just cybersecurity. And one of the ways that shows up would be a salary disparity between men and women. So is this something that you've seen or you've experienced at all over the time that you've been in the industry?
So I'll answer that question first. Have I experienced it? I would say no, I haven't experienced it. And if I had ever concern with any organization, I would always take it up with my hiring manager and HR. So I've been able to resolve all those issues. And I would encourage everyone, every woman who think there is a disparity, they should talk to their hiring manager. Coming to the question, gender inequality. So I'll go to a report, which recently was, not recently, I would say it was a 2017 study. It was done by ISC Square in collaboration with Executive Women Forum and Center for Cyber Safety and Education. This was a study done and published in 2017, and it had key 5 findings I'll talk about. It basically, that surveyed 19,641 information security professionals around 170 countries to understand the trends and issues affecting their profession and career. And the 5 key findings, and I'll talk about only 4 findings which are relevant to our discussion today. So those findings are, number 1, there are only 11% women in information security industry. Those are less number than overall representation of women in workforce. Second key finding is that globally, men are 4 times higher than more likely to hold C-level positions and 9 times more likely to hold managerial positions. Third finding is that 51% women report various form of indiscrimination in the InfoSec industry. And the last, which relates to the question you asked, in 2016, women earned less than men at all different levels in context of InfoSec industry. So it is the data which suggests there is a problem. And now we have to solve this problem. All professionals, organizations, executives, hiring managers, everyone have to collectively address this problem. And when we talk about gender inequality, there are a couple of things going on there. So when I talk to some CISOs and some hiring managers, sometimes I ask them, oh, why don't you hire more women? He said, Harpreet, we don't have in pipeline. We don't get cybersecurity candidates out there. So that is a problem. And I think we need to fix that problem, and that has to be fixed holistically. And how to fix that? I think that's your question, right? How do we address that? How do we have more women in cybersecurity? So if we think or address this problem holistically, we have to start from schools. And there has to be a very critical, and what critical is a collaboration between businesses, between academia, and between universities and the governments. That's extremely important. So at school level, we need to have school boards and schools creating optional cybersecurity awareness courses for grade 11 and 12 students to attract those girls out there to take those courses. For example, my son is in high school right now. He has optional courses, computer science. He has accounting. So we can have a cybersecurity course just to help them become better digital citizens. They have IB nights in schools. They can have cybersecurity nights in school. So there are many ways they can put the programs in place to attract those young girls to come into the to take those courses. And also we have to, I believe, educate the educators, the career counselors to educate those kids, to guide those kids that there is a career which is called cybersecurity and what does it entail. So that's where we can really address that problem. Then we have to come to universities. And there the businesses have to really very strongly collaborate with universities to send a word out that it's not about technology. Cybersecurity profession is not all about technology. And we have an example here. I was talking to Kimberly here, and I said, I'll quote you. She is from economics background, and she's in cybersecurity. So whenever I talk to someone and I introduce I'm a cybersecurity professional, they say, oh my God, you're a geek, you're pretty technical. And I am, but there are many opportunities. We need people with critical thinking skill. We need people with lawyers with cybersecurity skill set. So we need business, good orators who can articulate well. We need good writing skills for writing policies and standards. So that message has to go out to universities and colleges so that students know what this entails. And the last step, I think I'm going overboard, right? The last step where we have to work, where we can tackle the situation, where businesses, the organizations, the hiring managers, the executives, they have to develop programs to attract women, to develop women, and to retain women in cybersecurity. And I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you, Harpreet. So many points in there. But Raychael or Lauren, what are your thoughts there?
What she said. I just take it a little bit further, and I think in some ways, some of the challenges we're facing are not much different than what, for example, the engineering profession or the science professions face, is that we need to stop stereotyping that females are good at English and males are good at math and sciences, and because that's not true. And we just need to stop doing that so that we can start talking to, and right before the high school, that in public school we're starting to socialize all genders, that maths and sciences are equally as interesting as the literatures and the soft sciences, and that there's really interesting stuff, and it's not geeky to like math, and which, I was classified as a geek because I liked math, but that it's cool. And I think we need to be seen as panelists like this. I noticed that the ASC Squared conference coming up in Texas this fall, 3 of the 4 keynote speakers are women. So these are subject matter experts that are not geeks, that are doing really cool stuff, and we need more role models like that, so we stop looking at gender and just start looking at expertise and what interesting things are you doing.
Yeah.
So I'm supposed to comment after all of those brilliant comments. So to go back to the pay equity thing, so in some ways I feel like I might not fit on this panel, because at the commissioner's office where I work, there's about 40 employees, and I can count the men on one hand. So the vast majority of the people in that organization currently are women. So in terms of pay inequality, I would find that difficult to be able to comment on, I think, where I am today. Where I've been in previous places in my life, I can be pretty comfortable in saying that there was some pay inequality there, but not currently where I am. Okay. And in terms of just what you'd mentioned before about there being gender inequality and having different challenges, in the workplace for women, I really struggle with this as a question and as something to talk about, but because I think I look at it differently. I think women have challenges, but I think men are missing out. I think that when women may or may not be passed over for an opportunity because they're having children, they're taking time off, they're taking parental leave. I think men are missing out. Men should feel as though they can take parental leave as well, and that they won't be discriminated against because they're taking parental leave. So I think there's this need to kind of come together and support each other in both ways. It's not just that. I'm not saying that women aren't necessarily discriminated against because they're taking parental leave. In my office, that wouldn't make sense with 5 men in the office. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it would work. But I do think that there needs to be a change in the way we look at things, and we look and say, and all those men out there that missed the opportunity to take parental leave when you had small children, or you're thinking about doing it now, what an opportunity, what a great time to spend in your life, right? And if we support men and men support women more, I think it's much more of a two-way street than we have the opportunity to think about and really get our head around.
Do we have any men in the audience who may have taken paternal leave at all? Oh yeah, we have quite a few. All right, it's good. We don't want to, while we talk about equality and women, we don't want to also make it unfair for men to have the same kinds of experiences with their families that we do, right? I think about the fact that we should have societies where, an employer doesn't say, well, I'm not going to promote this woman because she'll be off for 18 months or 9 months. I think that it should be, I wonder if Harvinda has a kid, if we'll have to be without him for 9 months, as well. It shouldn't just be, about the women. But there was something that you said, Raychael, that popped a question into my head. You talked about how at the privacy office, it's female dominated, or it's 50-50, right? Do you think that, I think Lauren earlier was talking about how a lot of times we tell girls they'll be good at, softer things, maybe like psychology or more nurturing type professions. Do you think that there's a reason why women are drawn maybe more to privacy and compliance type roles as opposed to, say, security, or is there just not enough data to support where I'm going with this?
So I love this question because those of you who know me in my work life would know that it's not nurturing to be in privacy. And that what I always say to those who work on my team and who work in privacy generally is we're not in it to make friends. We're a regulator, right? So it's not an opportunity for that nurturing environment. I do think that it's fascinating that it does seem to be more female dominated. At least I would say definitely in my office, there's far more women than men. And in Alberta, most of the larger organizations that I work with, and actually many of the smaller organizations as well, the privacy officers are often women as well. But it probably evens out to be a bit more 50-50 outside of our office. I suspect that it has something to do with hours and availability in government, and traditionally women look for more of those positions which are more 8 to 4:30 because of the family commitments. Today, I would say that if that's the reason why you're choosing a job, then you're making the decisions in the wrong way, right? And you should find an organization that supports everybody, right, and not just taking it for those hours. But I do find it interesting that at least in our office, there's definitely more women than men. And on my team specifically, we do have the IT expertise, and we're working to continue to build that expertise as well. So we definitely have the tech people on the team as well. And my team, maybe that's actually, you know what? Maybe that is interesting, because my team is more 50-50, men and women, but when you look at the office, we've got like 5 or 6 men and 40 employees. So it's interesting. I don't really have an answer, which is why I'm kind of babbling through it a little bit. But
No, that's fine. I think there was one point that came up, Harpreet, when you were kind of talking there. In my own experience, being in security for the last few years and then IT for the last 10 years, I think, it's definitely always been a male-dominated environment. Undergrad, I think maybe there were a couple of goals in my classes. Even when I did my master's program, none of my lecturers were female, right? And I think as women, sometimes it's important for us to be able to see someone that looks like us in the position that we envision for ourselves. And when I thought about putting the panel together, I thought it would probably be nice to have a guy sitting here with us to see how they feel about these issues that we are talking about. I don't want to go off on a rant here, right? Yesterday I was talking to Michael Spaling, and he mentioned that he was at a conference some time ago, and they had a women in cybersecurity breakfast. And he said, he walked by kind of one of the organizers, and she said, are you going to come join us at the breakfast? And he said, am I invited? Because he just kind of like by default, he wasn't really sure if it was something that men were included in that discussion. And so my next question is, are we doing enough to engage not just women in this conversation, but also men? And is that necessary, that we have men help us champion this issue, or is it just something that we should be doing on our own?
Oh, can I start this one? Because I actually have an answer.
Absolutely.
So my answer to is, are we doing enough? The answer is absolutely not. We're not. We should have, whenever there's a gender issue, we can't just have one gender sitting here saying we're going to solve the problem, because we're not going to solve the problem without your help, right? We absolutely need to engage men as much as we can, and again, engaging men in the conversation helps men too. It helps because I know, and I've heard from men saying, "Well, I could never take mat leave or parental leave. I could never do this. I get frowned on if I'm the one taking my daughter to the dentist appointments and stuff like that, right?" Mm-hmm. So I do think that we absolutely need to engage men, and we need to understand their perspectives as much as ours as well, I think in your conversation yesterday, I think that it's really important that men feel welcome when we have opportunities to talk about women in cybersecurity, and that they can share their perspectives and vice versa as well.
Yeah, Lauren?
Yeah, this is not just women's problem. Like when you look at how we started off this conversation, that we've got this huge shortfall of cybersecurity expertise that we're facing. And part of that shortfall is overrepresented by a lack of women in the industry. That shortfall is not a women's problem. That's an industry problem, and we need to solve it. But beyond that, it's also a social problem, is that the things that we're talking about here are, if we fix them, it fixes quality of life, not just for women, but for the men who are our partners, and the men that are part of our families, and the boys that are being raised by equal men and women, and it just improves the quality of our society. So this is a far bigger, you wanted to fix the world. This is one way that we can all contribute to fixing the world, is by becoming far more aware of some of the subtle things that go on that put women in their place. And sometimes it's not intended, but we're just not aware of it. And sometimes it's been pointed out to me, and I've totally missed that a comment could be taken as offensive, and that it was derogatory and could be perceived as putting women down, or putting somebody of race down, or and we need to get better and more alert to those things and fix them.
Yeah. Harpreet, any thoughts?
So the question that should we include men?
Yeah.
I think there's no option, because we don't have many women out there. We have hiring manager men, we have executive men. So they would need to be included in this discussion. And I'll go back to research. I want to go back to data, because data is everything, I believe, right? So if we see today, we have only 11% women. That's one research what says. One of the research says that diversity, if you see Google, a lot of researches on diversity, which are happening quite a lot, diversity is extremely important for increasing the bottom line revenue of company. And McKinsey had done a research, and they said companies which had more women and gender diversity, their revenue was more than companies which didn't have women. So we have less women here in InfoSec industry, and we know that these two are facts. So what do we do? What is the best way to fill that gap? I think we're missing out on a talent pool out there which is sitting there, and we can use it, but how to use it? Again, it's incumbent upon executives, hiring manager, organizations to do more. And that's what yesterday my question was to CISO panel. Now it's upon the leaders to put those programs in place. I know it's challenging, it's not easy to do in organizations, but somebody have to take that initiative. To put those programs in place to attract and develop internal talent. And I know in my organization, there's so many people who interface with me from business. They're always excited about what's going on in cybersecurity. Harpreet, what kind of incident we had, what happened. They will like to share with me some of the stories going out there, which I'm already aware because I keep myself up to date on what's going on in threat landscape. But so you can gauge that they are interested in cybersecurity and they have out-of-the-box thinking skills. So obviously, if there is a leader out there, they can develop those internal talent. And I think that's really very important, which will help us in a long term, because this is a global problem, and it's going to bite us if we don't act towards it. So obviously, men have to be engaged in this discussion.
Yeah, as you guys are talking, there's a saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, feed him for life. But I thought, what if we were to throw women into that? And I thought, if you give a woman a fish, she'll feed her family. And I'm not being biased, right? If you teach a woman to fish, you empower the entire family. Like, research shows us that women, when we empower women, and when we allow them to be, contributors in our society economically, that you empower the entire society, right? So just something that kind of popped into my mind as you guys were talking. We've talked a lot about the challenges, but as we kind of wind this down, and we want to talk a little bit about solutions, can you comment on triumphs or, just some triumphs that you've had so far in your career, encouragements? Yep. Yeah, I'll give you a minute to think about it.
You want to start with Raychael?
No, I was actually, I think we should start with Lauren.
Okay. Lauren, yes, my vote is.
Rather than talk about triumphs, because I've had a lot of high points through my career, I'm going to talk about why I had those high points, okay, and what enabled them. And I can credit my parents for raising a smart girl, but beyond that, I've had some incredible mentors, and some of them formal mentorship and some of them informal mentorship, but I've had incredible mentors throughout my career that have helped me by asking me tough questions at times and by guiding me, and so that has certainly enabled me to do some really fun stuff with my career. But the other piece of that is that I have become a mentor, and both formally with the U of A MBA program, but also informally. I like mentoring. I like growing people and helping people grow. And so I think more of us need to do that. There are so many opportunities if you grab them to just help somebody by asking them a tough question sometimes, by pointing out that perhaps their approach was not the best and helping them think about how could they do it differently the next time. Not in a derogatory manner, but in a manner to help them learn. And I think if my mentors have taught me anything, they've taught me to appreciate that kind of approach and to pass it on. And I think if I look back over my career, that's probably the one thing that I really say has been a huge accomplishment on my part, is that I've helped individuals and organizations change and grow. And that's been fun.
That's awesome. Raychael?
So I've also had some really incredible opportunities, some great challenges presented to me, and great support in helping reach some of those. I think what I'd like to touch on is what you mentioned when you were providing that brief bio, where it was my first offense investigation. We do have regulatory investigations as a small piece of what my team does, and it was my very first one that I had done, and it resulted in 38 charges, and it ended up becoming this massive investigation that was way out of my the normal work that I do, especially when it ends up resulting in criminal charges, which is not something we deal with, right? So it was far beyond what I felt comfortable doing, but I rose to the challenge and got the work done. And I do think that a lot of that triumph comes from the fact that I had a lot of support from the people that I needed it. My boss at the time, who happens to be in the room, was very supportive of me and kind of just let me go with the investigation. And I would go to him and I would say, okay, this is what we found so far. Do we still need to go down here? And was very supportive in encouraging me to get to that point. And so I do see that as being a high point in my career, but it was because I had that support, and I had somebody that I felt like I could trust when I was entering a territory that the office hadn't entered before, and that I certainly hadn't before. So I don't think that the triumphs in my career, and I would say for most or all of them, are really based on having that support around me as well, and that trust of those people that I know that they've got my back has really helped to solidify what those challenges were, or those triumphs were, I should say.
All right. Harpreet?
I would say many triumphs. Again, my entire 10-year journey in Canada has been a triumph. I worked on some major cybersecurity projects or initiatives, I would say, with some organizations, and that increased the security maturity, and that really gives a very satisfying feeling. That's a triumph. Balancing that family commitment with work life and raising a healthy family, all along the way has been a triumph. So overall, I would say I see every challenge as an opportunity, learn from it, and then you have that feeling inside, oh, I could do it. So that itself is a triumph. I have been able to build great relationship both within and outside my organization with great leaders and great role models. I consider it a big triumph, and I would encourage everyone, like young people out here who are entering in this field, associate with the people you want to be like. The leaders, network more, and try to connect to, just go for coffee with them. Say, I would like to be like you, I want to learn from you. So I believe that has been a bigger part, associating with the people I wanted to be like, with the great leaders and role models. So I would say in a nutshell, many triumphs, which I'm very proud of.
All right, one of the things I think that came through in all of your answers would probably be mentorship, right? You all mentioned that in some way. I don't know, I think I see a lot of young faces, like student faces. I've interacted with a few people in the audience, and I know that some people are just getting started in their careers. How do we tap into those networks, right? As professional women, you've all been in the industry for over a decade, Do you have time? Like, how do you find time for mentorship with everything else that you have going on, right? That's the first question, I guess. And then how would a young person or someone just getting into the industry tap into that to be able to connect with mentors?
I'm gonna start this one. I'm gonna start by pointing out that my mentors, as I look back over my history, really they've not been female. And one of the cool things about engaging a male as a mentor is that they all of a sudden are engaged in understanding your problems and your challenges and helping you address them. So as a female looking for someone to mentor, do not think that it should only be a woman. In fact, you may further your cause by choosing a male who can be an extraordinary mentor to you. The second thing is that being a mentor doesn't mean that getting a mentor doesn't mean that you're going to have somebody solve your problem. It means you're going to have somebody who maybe in a very short conversation asks you a couple tough questions and sends you away to think about them. So it isn't necessarily time consuming, although it does take time. But the other part of that is, as a mentor, it's very rewarding. And I've never had a mentorship relationship where I'm mentoring where I haven't learned a ton, and it hasn't caused me to stop and reflect on how am I engaging and how am I learning and what am I doing. So it's a two-way street. There's benefit for both parties, and if you don't enter into the relationship thinking that way, then you're not going to get as much out of it.
Yeah. Harpreet?
I would like to add here, and 100% I agree with what Lauren said. I think mentors are very important for learning more, and solving some of the problems, because they will not solve your problem, but they will kind of ask those questions, what exactly she said. And I would encourage all those young people out here who are just entering this field to find a mentor. You can find it through LinkedIn. You are coming to these conferences. If you like someone, strike a conversation, talk to them about it. There are ISACA conferences. Any conferences you can get hands-on. You're able to come to UFA and talk to any professor, Just send them an email. And I have seen, being my experience in Canada, people are so good. They respond to your emails. And whoever I have tried to connect to ask a question, they have always responded to me. So never, if somebody doesn't respond, don't worry about it. There'll be next person who'll respond. So always go ahead and find a person you can associate with who's already there and can help you out. So mentoring is the key. I would 100% agree with what Lauren said.
Raychael?
So I'm going to take this in a different direction a little bit and give you a personal story about the power of mentorship. I've had a number of mentors. I would say they were all pretty informal. I saw them as a mentor. They may not have realized that I felt that relationship. But when I was back at the government of Manitoba many years ago, the assistant deputy minister at the time, his name was Robert Garrigue, and I encourage you all to Google him. He was a brilliant man. He's passed away many years ago now, but I looked up to him. I went to him with all of my issues as being new into the workforce and trying to navigate a lot of unknown territory for me. And also, I was still my master's was in public administration, which did not prepare me for IT governance, right? So I was trying to navigate that as well. And he was a fabulous man. And the day I left the government of Manitoba, he was in a meeting with a couple of ministers, and he wasn't able to be there. And he sent me an email apologizing for not being there. And the context of the email was that he'd sort of seen me grow over the time I was there and pointed out some of my strengths and stuff like that. I still have that email to this day, and there are days where I come home and I'm like, oh, I've had a horrible day. I'm horrible at my job. I give up, right? I need to find a new career in landscaping or something else, right? And totally take a different tour. But I look at that. I still look at that email. It's in my jewelry box, and it still gives me that power and that strength to say, you know what? I believed in that man. He was a brilliant man, and he believed in me. And so there's power in that. And I do think that even if it's an informal relationship rather than a formal relationship, there's a formal mentee-mentor relationship. There's power in working with people and helping to encourage their careers grow. And you remember them. I mean, this was several years ago when I graduated from my master's program, and I keep that with me.
Yeah. Thanks. Thomas, do we have time for a couple of...
Yeah, certainly we definitely have some time for some questions. So thank you, panelists. If just with a show of hands, does anybody have any questions for the panel?
So as a student in cybersecurity, it was really motivating and inspiring to hear you all. So thank you so much for that. Having discussed about the inequality and challenges that women face in technology, I wanted to know if you have any mentorship programs or workshops in your respective organizations, or if not already there, if there's anything you would like to initiate in your organization.
In my organization, we have mentorship program, but not for cybersecurity. So there are many organizations out there like Deloitte. They have a mentorship program. Rachel, I think you worked for Deloitte, right?
I did, but it was 8 years ago.
Okay. The reason I'm mentioning Deloitte, because when I came new to Canada, I was desperate for the job I wanted to work in, right? So I was looking for avenues where I can really network with people. And there was a Deloitte women workshop where they were going to there'll be women leaders out there, and they will talk to you, and they will spend 5 minutes with you, one woman, and then second woman, and you keep going like that. So there are some organizations where those programs are there, but they open it up to other, external people. So keep an eye on that. Search out on Google and on those companies. And I think it's extremely important for organizations to have those programs. And when, again and again I say, it's important executives and hiring managers and organizations have these programs in place. So that's what I mean whenever I say that. So we should have those programs, but in my organization for cybersecurity, we don't have that. But whenever somebody reaches out to me on LinkedIn, and people have reached out to me from Australia, from US, students doing masters, and they want to know more about cybersecurity, I have always responded to them. I've tried to encourage them and answered their questions. So I think right now, online information and ability to connect geographically is huge, so you can really take advantage of that.
Thanks, Harpreet. I think we have one more.
Thank you. I'll stand up for this one. My name is Chris Hammond-Thrasher, and I'm the security consulting practice lead for Canada for Fujitsu Consulting. And my organization is formally committed to diversity when it comes to hiring and promoting practices. But I wanted to say that we're hiring now, and we've been hiring for ever since I joined the cybersecurity business unit. I've been with the company for years, but I've been with cybersecurity for 2 years. We've been looking for intermediate and senior cybersecurity consultants, and we have yet to have a single female applicant. So if you fit that bill and you're looking for work, come chase me down. But yeah, I mean, something's wrong out there, right? That we all need to work together to fix.
Thanks. Yeah, there's one more right at the top. I think we can fit one more in.
Just had a question about mentorship. You mentioned that some people can sometimes look outside of their organization for mentorship, and that has the benefit of connecting you to people. If you're looking for a female mentor, you can find that outside of your organization, maybe easier than you can inside. Or if there's a skill set or a role, you can seek them out outside of your organization. Do you have any tips for people looking outside of their organization for mentors, specifically around the diciness of the subject matter that we deal with, like in privacy? If you're dealing with a very legal problem, it might be difficult to discuss that outside of your organization legally. So any suggestions for how to pursue that?
Why are you all looking at me?
He mentioned, I thought he mentioned privacy.
Stuck with it. No, actually, I do think it's a really good question, because when we were talking before today about what this panel would look like, I said it's hard for me as somebody who works for a regulator to mentor, because I can't be seen as providing advice, right? So we do struggle with that. I do struggle with that. My advice would be that, and this is going to sound like a cop-out from a regulator, but I generally provide more general advice. Let's say, well, generally speaking, if you're experiencing a lot of ransomware, you may want to consider, right? And I'm a little bit more careful in my wording. But I think that generally speaking, for an organization like my office, for 40 people, there's not a lot of room for big mentorship programs, right? And most people who work there are at an intermediate or senior level already. So people new to the organization or looking for a bit of a career change, there's not a lot of that opportunity there. So you are, like, people are looking from outside our organization in. So I think that environments like this, so when there's opportunities to network here, I'm betting that, what was it called, the YEGSEC? I bet that's a great opportunity to look for people to work with and mentor. And Privacy has this group that meets a couple times a year called Privacy After Hours. It's through IAP. I know it's got kind of a funny name. But like, there's opportunities like that. You look outside, and then as long as you're careful and it's that one-on-one relationship and that the person's not providing you with direct advice, like, and you're not writing it down saying, Raychael said to do this, I think it's probably going to be okay. But it's a really good point that it does make sometimes for some of those conversations to be a little bit more difficult and complex.
So I'm just going to jump in with two things, is that mentorship doesn't always have to be a formal, established relationship. Is that I've been mentored, and I have mentored people on a one-time basis with a quick conversation, and I've had other relationships that are ongoing for many years where we've never actually talked about, the fact that somebody was a mentor to me. But in all cases, a really great mentor is not going to solve your problem or not even going to give you solutions. They're just going to ask you really good questions. So, and have you go think about them. And you may come back and bounce ideas and they may go, yeah, that sounds sound. And that's something, because I've gone through formal mentorship training, that's something that is really underscored, is that it's not the mentor's job to provide you with the solution. We're just there to help you come up with the solution that you really have. You just haven't discovered it yet.
All right, I think we're definitely out of time. Thank you so much, ladies.
Yeah, so just a quick story before we finish the panel. We heard a lot about mentorship. We heard a lot about finding sort of the union between information security and privacy. So 10 years ago, I worked at a professional services firm, and I worked on the digital forensic side. And I had an opportunity to apply at a position at a public entity, but it was within the information security and privacy office. So I felt a little bit out of my element. I didn't really know what to do, but I wanted to do really well at the interview. So Raychael and I went to Second Cup in Manulife Place, and in the 45 minutes that we had a talk, I said, tell me everything that you know about privacy. I really want to ace this interview. So we talked about community. I interviewed, obviously, with Brent and with Christine, and I got the job. So she's responsible for where I am at today. So thank you, Raychael.